Good evening, everybody. I'm Deborah Weiner. We hope you found our special edition of 11 TV Hill informative and helpful. These are really tough conversations for sure. So many families are struggling with addiction, and the COVID-19 pandemic and the isolation so many people are feeling is not helping anyone. So we want to continue this conversation here on Facebook tonight, and we've assembled a panel of experts to answer your questions. We want you to go ahead and post these questions in the comments, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. So joining us tonight is Jim Wahlberg. He is the Executive Director of the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation. Orville Green is the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the DEA Baltimore District Office. Dr. Cindy Graham is a licensed clinical psychologist and founder of the Brighter Hope Wellness Center. And Brittany Spencer is the Director of Opioid Overdose Prevention for the Baltimore City Health Department. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And Jim, I want to start with you. You share the story of a really painful, difficult childhood in your book, The Big Hustle. You said you started drinking at the age of 8. Do you have any advice for kids and their families who might be coming up in similar situations?
Yeah, well, I think the first step is admitting there's a problem, right? And communication is the absolute key. So, for me, I was starved for attention. I was one of 9 children, and my parents worked multiple jobs all the time. And so I looked out in the street, and I always looked in the wrong places. I never looked in the right places. There were good examples around me, but for some reason, I was drawn to the bad examples. And, we have to open our mouths. We have to communicate with each other. We have to let people know where we're at. And if it's your family, you can't talk to your family, need to talk to somebody else. And clearly in these difficult times, it gets a little more complicated, right? But everybody has one of these iPhones or an Android in their pocket now, right? We communicate virtually like this now. So if that's the best we can do, then we need to do that, but we need to communicate.
Jim, I was really struck by something among the darkest times for so many people.
Yeah, I mean, again, I have to go back to this piece of technology that we're all walking around with, right? We spend hours and hours and hours on our cell phones. And this can be a tool also to save your life, right? Right now, for me, to maintain my own recovery, part of what I do is I'm reaching out to other people. I'm reaching out to people that I know are struggling, but I'm also reaching out to just everybody to let them know that I love them and that I value them, right? You never know what the situation is for the person that you're going to call, right? And also, I find when I'm struggling, and I struggle still today with many, many years in recovery, sometimes I struggle. Sometimes I have issues. And, I might call somebody looking to unload, and then find out that they're going through a tough time, right? And sometimes just being there to listen to somebody else or sharing my difficulties with somebody, it really starts to cut it in half, right? I will say this. Yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're in some very difficult and dark times, but treatment programs are out there and they're available and they will take you, right? If you make the call. But you got to take that first step, and we all need help, and particularly in these tough times.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate you being honest about your own challenges and the idea of just finding that internal motivation to seek the help as opposed to that external motivation maybe from somebody else who is trying to get you to. And I want to come back to that in a little bit. So I'm going to move on for now to Mr. Green. And I'm wondering, when we talk about the pandemic, which is clearly a thread in this conversation tonight, what effect has it had on the DEA's overall mission here in Baltimore? I mean, there's so much going on. How do you keep that? I mean, obviously, it's in the forefront of what you do, but how do you keep that as something that is on the front burner in our community, Mr. Green?
Well, the pandemic hasn't impacted our overall mission. We continue to work cases. We continue to conduct investigations. Where we've had to make some adjustments is with the prosecutors and with the courts, because again, we still have to prosecute cases, but being mindful of the pandemic. And so we've had to work even closer than we normally do with the prosecutors and with the courts in order to keep everyone safe. Now, in terms of the pandemic impacting the overall drug trafficking supply chain, that we've seen that the pandemic has had an impact on drug trafficking. We're seeing more stockpiles of narcotics, of drugs, and money along the border. And in Baltimore, in our investigations, in our drug seizures, in our money seizures, that trend is also represented here as well. We're seeing a lot more of everything.
That's really interesting. I don't know if I've necessarily seen that reported in Baltimore. So let me just clarify here. So you're saying that there is a greater stockpile, is that correct, of product, if you will, because of the pandemic?
Yes, ma'am. Well, the stockpile is on the Mexican side of the border, and the money, all the currency is sitting here. So when we do have seizures, much larger seizures than we have seen traditionally in the past.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you, Mr. Green. I want to pivot now to Cindy Graham, a psychologist, and one thing we were chatting about, Dr. Graham, is that it is so difficult right now to access good therapy. Anybody will tell you, if they've tried to reach out to find a therapist, that oftentimes you hear that a psychologist or a psychiatrist is saying, I can't take new patients right now because they're so overwhelmed with people who are having mental health crises. So how do you deal with that when you find a young person, or really anyone who is struggling with addiction, misuse, who's finally say, I'm going to get help, I want to reach out and get help, and they can't find necessarily somebody who will be able to make room for them? What do you do in that situation? And what is the reality of this right now?
Right. It is very heartbreaking, and it's difficult as a psychologist and as a practice owner to have to, to recognize that you may be filled and have to refer clients elsewhere. And so one of the things that I know that I do in my practice, and that a lot of other practitioners do as well, is that we try to have our own lists of people that we can turn to that would have availability. Oftentimes, schools can be a really great resource. So many guidance counselors have training in being able to address these types of matters. Each school generally has a school psychologist that's also additionally trained in providing mental health services. Sometimes it might mean for some families that they might be stretching what they thought they wanted to see in a clinician. So ideally, we absolutely recommend that you see somebody that you feel 100% comfortable with, ideally somebody that you can identify with. And certainly in the times that we're living now, finding a good match based on race and cultural identity becomes really, really important. But we also know that clinicians of color are very difficult to find. And so sometimes it does mean potentially looking to a clinician of a different race than you are, or of a different ethnicity. And it's really about finding the right fit in terms of theoretical orientation, so their approach to therapy, the way in which they listen to you and your family and your needs. Certainly go out and talk to different people, in those providers that might not be initially the best fit that you thought that they might be. Still try to have a 15-minute consultation with them. Lots of times providers will allow you to do that at very low cost, or free lots of times, to be able to make sure it's a good fit. And then, if you're really not able to find a good fit after talking to several providers, again, you can look at schools, you can look at various community services. So community mental health centers will often take people, sometimes even going to like your emergency facilities or emergency mental health centers, their mobile crisis units. There's so many options that can at least provide some temporary acute care, and then they will also help you transition to that long-term care.
I'm sure one of the problems, Dr. Graham, that you probably feel is contributing to this right now is that we've lost some of the windows into our soul right now. And some of those windows are people that you've just mentioned, teachers and guidance counselors, and those relationships. Oftentimes nobody knows a young person better than a teacher, and can see someone really struggling. So we've lost that set of eyes that is so vital for young people. So I wonder, how you feel that's ultimately affecting young people. They don't have that extra set of eyes outside of their family and friends who can say, you know what, something's not right here.
Right. Yeah. And that is, so I'm part of actually an area mental health group, and we talk about concerns just like this. Like, how do we reach the students that are not able to log in, that we are not reaching in that way? And it really is difficult. What we really talk about are reaching out to our community resources that have ability to go to the homes, kind of do wellness checks. It is really difficult, but it is something that we continue to try. I recently had heard stories of certain guidance counselors reaching out to even friends of the particular student that they're trying to find as a way to reach them. I think this is definitely where community resources become important, and becoming a neighborhood, checking on your neighbors, checking on your friends, obviously in a very socially distant and responsible manner. But, this is a time period where we do have to think outside of the box. And just as Jim mentioned, using social media, using our cell phones as ways to reach students. A lot of students are on apps like TikTok and Instagram. Those are great ways to be able to reach kids that might not otherwise be reached in the classroom. And so it takes some creativity, but there are various, chat rooms on everything from Twitch to Roblox. There are lots of different ways electronically and technologically that we can reach students that can be quite effective. So it's stretching all of us right now, but there are paths.
Yeah, stretching indeed. Thank you, Dr. Graham. Brittany, I want to talk to you about the city's response strategy to the opioid epidemic. How important is community engagement, particularly right now, Brittany?
Community engagement is key. I mean, it is the absolute critical piece right now, especially. I think that this pandemic has really highlighted the importance of involving community, because we can't be everywhere anymore. We can't, a lot of our services have not halted, but have been altered. We've had to scale back on our spot van, which is a healthcare on the spot. I mean, we were in multiple locations. Our syringe exchange program has had to cut back on their locations and their hours to keep their staff safe, to keep the residents safe. So involving community is absolutely critical. Our opioid intervention team just went through a strategic planning process where we had 4 different convenings with community members to hear from them, to hear what it is and how it is that they want us to respond. Because without them, we can't just assume what they need. So we need to know from a family's perspective, from somebody with lived experience that has suffered from substance use disorder, somebody that works in the field. We need to know, what does this look like in Baltimore City, and what can the health department do better to serve those that we're trying to serve?
Thanks, Brittany. Jim, I want to circle back to you and ask you a question. Perhaps when you first sought recovery, you were called an addict. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And now, of course, we use this term misuser. What's your thoughts on that? Do you consider yourself a recovering addict or a recovering misuser? I'm just curious. I've wanted to have this discussion about the semantics.
It's a very interesting thing that I've spoken to quite a few of my friends in recovery about. Sometimes I do a lot on social media, and I refer to myself as a recovering addict. Or a recovered addict, contingent on my spiritual condition today, even. And I'll get people that will say, you have to be careful with your words. You have to be careful what the language. And I'm sorry, but I don't have to be careful with the language that I use about myself. I can certainly be careful about the language that I use about others, but I will identify myself as a person in recovery. I'm an addict. That's the way it's always been for me, right? It's not just about addictive substances or illegal drugs. If I go in my cabinet right now, I have an Oreo, I can tell you for sure I'm going to have a few Oreos. And I might have more Oreos than I should have, because it's my wiring, right? So I need to this is a daily reprieve, right? I got to be working on this every day. right? And, it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away, right? So, I'm not always the guy that says the right thing. I'm an old guy, right? I'm 55 years old.
That's not old. That's not old, Jim.
I'm doing the best I can, right? Call yourself what you want, but let's get to a solution, right? Let's see how we can get you to a place where you're referring to yourself as a person in recovery, not as a person suffering, but somebody enjoying your life, right? I live a joy-filled life. I live a life of service. I live a life of happiness. Not all the time. It's not all roses, but I have some tools that I was given that were put at my feet that if I choose to pick those tools up, I can live an amazing life.
Jim, how difficult is this time of year for people who are recovered? You add this time of year to the pandemic and the challenges of a very dark winter that we keep hearing about every single day. I mean, I can tell you as a news anchor, we're telling people every day how difficult this time is and how difficult it will continue to get. So I wonder, for those who are struggling, how difficult it is to hear that and to find help and hope, knowing that this is our atmosphere.
Well, I'm going to say this, and I mean no disrespect to your profession, right? But I will encourage people to shut off the TV. Get your head out of the news, right? Because aside from a program like this, where there are many positives that will come out of this, right? But you turn on the news and it's bad news. And I think maybe it's because bad news sells or whatever it is, but it's all bad news. And so I would start with that. And I would have a list of people that are in recovery in my hand, in my phone at all times. Speed dial. Shouldn't be, the guy I play video games with. It should be the people that are in recovery, that I respect their recovery, and I should be in contact with them. And again, I'll tell you, there's no substitute for trying to be of service to others, right? When I get depressed or when I get a little funky, and the holidays can do that to me. They have in the past, right? Now you add a pandemic, you add all these other things, you add financial challenges and isolation. It's heavy stuff. It's heavy stuff. And we need to tighten up our boots. We need to be communicating. We need to be lifting each other up. We need to be looking for opportunities to lift somebody else up. Every single person that you call, you have no idea what their situation is, but just that call alone, that they know you care, could change everything for them for that day.
Well said.
And I want to say one more thing, if I may, because I would be remiss if I didn't say that prayer. I'm a prayerful person. I'm a believer, and there's no substitute for that for me, right? There's no substitute for that. So if you are a prayerful person, I highly recommend it.
Jim, you're very inspirational. I appreciate your answer, and you're not the first person to have that take on the reality of what we're communicating on a nightly basis. It's important for us to communicate the facts, and it's hard for us too. But I appreciate your honest answer on that. Dr. Graham, I want to ask you, first of all, are you seeing individuals in person, or are you doing everything virtually?
We are doing everything virtually at this point. Yeah. I started considering the idea of opening up our office to start seeing people face to face on a limited basis. And, with the increase in rates of COVID and people becoming ill and sick. And, for me, the decision for myself and for my practice, it didn't feel right to open up our doors. So we are conducting sessions virtually.
I get that. And I know it's hard if you don't already have a relationship with a therapist to start that relationship virtually. I think it can be very, very challenging. I do want to ask you how you treat addiction in teenagers. What is the protocol that you use, and how difficult is it? Because if you're treating addiction in teenagers, you're obviously working very closely with the parents as well because you have a minor. So I'm sure it is a tricky road because you're really treating, I mean, if a young person is coming in with a 2-parent household, you're really treating 3 people, are you not?
Mm-hmm. Right, or even more, because then when you take siblings into account, it really you are dealing with an entire dynamic. So the ideal theoretical orientation to approach it from would be cognitive behavioral therapy that really addresses not just the behaviors that the teen or the child might be engaging in, but then also the thoughts and the emotions that are underlying it. Ideally, you would also provide services to the parents. We often recommend that the parents see someone separate from the therapist that the teen sees, because that way the child feels they know that the conversation that they're having with their therapist is private. It stays there between them. It helps that the therapist is then advocating for the child. And then when the parents or the family as a unit, if they have their own therapist, then again, the alliances are just different with respect to the counselor. And so a lot of what we really try to get at, as I mentioned in the earlier on in the program, that was shown in the 8 o'clock hour, is that we look at what are some risk factors that that predispose kids or might have led them down the road to use, as Jim mentioned earlier, for him being a child of 9 and, growing up how he did, there was something that he was searching for there. And, certainly not that we're trying to lay blame. Lots of times parents feel very guilty about the environment that their children are in. And we reassure them, we know you're doing the best that you can as well. And especially during this pandemic, everybody is just trying to make it through the day, make it through the next day. So we really approach things from multiple levels. We address the foundations and the roots. We teach better coping skills. We create crisis plans so that if they are in those moments where they're feeling really, really down or they're really struggling with, with the urge to use, that we give them, other resources that they can turn to. Again, we give them, we encourage them to turn to friends, other family members, mentors. It really is a multifaceted approach that we use. And obviously, if they're also in active addiction, the first step would be to be in a treatment program that would allow them to come down off of that. And then there's like a step down process that they would go through. Even during this time period where you might not get to meet a therapist face to face, especially in the way that we do it on an outpatient basis, a lot of our clients who were initially very hesitant to try teletherapy, after trying it, they were like, it really feels like we're there in the same room together. So I think for people, it takes a lot of bravery to admit that you are struggling with addiction. And so, taking that extra step, like continuing on down that brave path and continuing to push yourself and trying the teletherapy method, it's a lot that these kids go through. And, we really try to support them as best as we can. There's also group therapy. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and then, all of the various different formats of, group and support groups that we know of, Al-Anon, Narconon, all the various outlets that there are with respect to getting support services. So it really is a multifaceted approach. We want to make sure that kids are living full, rich lives, that they know that they have lots of different options while they're doing that hard work of, getting to the root of their particular addiction. Sometimes it means having brave conversations with their families and with their parents, with their therapist as an ally. That the therapist often can help initiate those conversations and the discussions and opening topics of hurt. And so it's a process. There are definitely lots of steps to it, lots of components, but it's something that is really effective at helping kids and families move past.
Thank you, Doctor. Brittany, I want to ask you about Naloxone and why it is so important in this ongoing battle to have access to it. And I'm curious, also sort of a pandemic-related question, if at all there is a sort of nexus between what's going on with the pandemic and Naloxone, if there is any shortage of it, if there's a problem with distribution, or has that been unscathed, if you will, during this time?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So naloxone, the reason why it's so important is because it's the life-saving, antidote to opioid overdose. It reverses an overdose without it takes maybe a 5-minute training for somebody to be able to administer it properly. And it reverses the overdose. It saves a life. It provides somebody with a next day to try to get up and do better. And in terms of the distribution in the city, it has been unscathed. If anything else, it has been increased. So with the opioid treatment centers in the city, with the loosened restrictions on prescribing treatment medications such as buprenorphine and methadone, patients are now able to take them home when they previously were not able to. And so now with every take home, they're getting it paired with a kit of naloxone. So that was in partnership with the state health department and the local health department. And we were able to get all of the local treatment centers naloxone. We've shifted. I think everybody in the city has shifted to doing virtual trainings. So we have set up pickup locations for people to get their naloxone kits after they're trained. We partnered with BHRC to be able to get naloxone kits sent home through the mail. So we've really come up with some creative ways to avoid the pandemic really impeding on our progress of really saturating the city with naloxone.
I'm glad to hear that. Mr. Green, I want to ask you, we focus so much on treatment and those kind of issues right now, but I do want to get to you since you're our law enforcement voice tonight. And as we begin to wrap up, your thoughts listening to all of this right now, and if you could say one thing to a family out there from a law enforcement perspective, what you would share with families when it comes to what you have seen in your years with the DEA?
Well, I would say law enforcement is also a partner. We're not we're not tied treatment. I think we have a role to play. I drive through the city of Baltimore every day on my way to work. And I see people on the corners. I see these people nodding off. I see these people in what I believe to be extreme pain. And I don't think that that's okay. I don't think anyone really chooses to exist that way. And so we're reminded every day that we go to work why we do the things that we do. And it's really to give these people an opportunity to enter recovery, to get that shot at having their next day. So, we are not, we're a part of the solution as well. I think just on a different side of it. I would just encourage folks and let folks know that, in doing what we do as law enforcement in trying to keep drugs off of the street, really it's to give people an opportunity to enjoy a full life. And really just to not be in pain. It's hard to look at when you see these people and and you feel helpless. But that's our outlet, is trying to give these people a chance to keep the poison off the street.
I'm very touched by that response, and people are in such tremendous pain. Jim, I want you to have the last word tonight, and what would be your final message?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank the law enforcement, the DEA. They do create an opportunity by slowing the flow, right? But I think the last word for me tonight is that we really need to take care of each other. We need to love each other. We need to lift each other up, right? We need to be using the time that we have. If people are home now, right? We need to use the time that we have to connect with the ones that we love. We can't do it in person, then we need to use this technology. But we need to lift people up. We need to let people know that they matter, that their recovery matters, that they're an important part of your life and your family, and them being in recovery means something to you, right? And for those that are struggling, man, I just want to say that Help is there. Help is available. And there's a lot of people struggling, right? People that are in recovery, they know they can log on. There are Zoom meetings, recovery meetings, 24 hours a day. You can go to meetings in Paris. You can go to meetings anywhere you want now. But you got to use the tools. You got to pick up the phone. You got to get on that computer. You got to reach out. You have to open your mouth. So I would encourage people, again, every opportunity to lift somebody up. Let them know that you care about them, that you love them.
Jim, thank you. Brittany, thank you. Dr. Graham and Mr. Green, we appreciate you making time for us tonight. I thank all our panel and everybody that watched tonight. It's such an important conversation that needs to continue. People are in pain and they need help. Anyone who may be watching who is looking for help, you'll find a great list of local resources on this website, drugfreeisuptome.org. Again, that is drugfreeisuptome.org. Stay safe and well, everyone, and have a great night.